384,400 kilometers away, 27% the size of Earth, 400 times smaller than the Sun, 400 times closer to Earth than the Sun. Those two numbers are not a coincidence science has explained. They are a coincidence science has simply accepted. For billions of years, the Moon has orbited this planet close enough to move entire oceans, influence human biology, and block out the light of a star 1,000,000 times its size, with millimeter-perfect precision. We've sent 12 humans to walk on it. We've crashed rockets into it on purpose to measure what happens. We've mapped its gravity, drilled its surface, and analyzed rocks it sent back to us. And the more we learn, the more questions we find. Today we travel through 7 mysteries of the Moon, things that are documented, measured, and real, that science still has not fully resolved. 1. The Moon rings like a bell. November 1969. Apollo 12. The mission is over. Before leaving lunar orbit, the crew deliberately crashed the ascent stage of their lunar module into the Moon's surface. It hit with the force of a small explosion. On Earth, we would expect a brief rumble, a few seconds, maybe a minute. The Moon vibrated for 55 minutes. 4 years later, Apollo 13's spent rocket stage, heavier, faster, impacted the surface. The Moon vibrated for 3 hours and 20 minutes. Astronaut Pete Conrad, watching the seismograph data, described what he saw. It's like you hit a bell. The scientific explanation is real. The Moon is bone dry. No water, no fluid in the rock. On Earth, moisture absorbs seismic energy. Vibrations die within seconds. The Moon has no such dampening. Fractured, dry rock scatters waves endlessly, like sound in an empty cathedral. That explains the duration, but not everything. During Apollo 17, geologist Harrison Schmitt noted something in his field report that was quietly filed away. The resonance patterns of certain impact sites were inconsistent with a solid uniform interior. Some waves moved as if they had encountered hollow space. No official statement was ever made about this. The data exists in the NASA archive. Researchers studying the topic later wrote, "The data does not support a hollow moon, but it does not rule out large voids at depth." The Nunai people of the Russian Far East have a different explanation. One passed down for 2,000 years. They say the Moon is not a rock, it is a vessel. Something that arrived, settled into orbit, and watches. Science says, fractured, dry crust. The Nunai say, a vessel. The vibrations lasted 3 hours and 20 minutes. Neither answer fully explains why. If that mystery lives on the surface, the next one begins 384,000 kilometers above your head, in the moment you look up and see the sun disappear. 2. The coincidence that shouldn't exist. The sun is 1.4 million kilometers wide. The Moon is 3,474 kilometers wide. The sun is exactly 400 times larger than the Moon. The sun is exactly 400 times farther from Earth than the Moon. From your position on Earth, they appear to be the same size. Not approximately the same size. Not close. The same, to within fractions of a percent. This is why total solar eclipses are possible. The Moon fits over the sun like a lid on a jar. The corona, the sun's outer atmosphere, invisible at all other times, becomes visible to the naked eye for a few minutes, a few times per decade, from specific points on Earth's surface. No other planet in the solar system has this. Jupiter's moons are too small or too large. Saturn's moons are too close or too distant. Mars has no moon large enough to produce a total eclipse. Earth is the only place in the known universe where this geometry exists. Science's answer? Coincidence. A cosmic accident with no cause, no meaning, no implication. But here is the part scientists also acknowledge. It is temporary. The Moon moves 3.8 centimeters farther from Earth every year. 1 million years ago, eclipses were slightly different. In 600 million years, the Moon will be too far away for total eclipses to occur at all. We exist in the one window, out of Earth's 4.5 billion years, when this geometry is perfect. The Maori of New Zealand called the Moon Marama, the great revealer of hidden things. They did not explain the eclipse as a coincidence. They explained it as a deliberate unveiling, a moment when the sky opens to show what lies beneath ordinary light. Science says, coincidence, temporary, with no mechanism. The Maori say, a deliberate unveiling. What strikes astronomers is not the coincidence itself, it's the window. We happen to be alive in the exact era when it's perfect, but the perfect geometry is not the deepest mystery. The deepest mystery is what's on the Moon that shouldn't be there at all. 3. The Moon's water shouldn't exist. For most of the 20th century, scientists were certain of one thing about the Moon. It was completely dry, bone dry, the driest body in the solar system. The Apollo samples seem to confirm it. No water, no trace of water. Then in 2008, scientists re-examined the same Apollo samples with better equipment. They found water, locked inside tiny glass beads formed by ancient lunar volcanoes, erupted billions of years ago, preserved inside volcanic glass for 3 billion years. The concentration? Enough water in the lunar interior to fill a lake. In 2024, NASA's data revealed widespread ice deposits in permanently shadowed craters near the moon's poles, craters that haven't seen sunlight in billions of years. Water ice, stable, accessible. In 2025, China's Chang'e 6 mission returned samples from the lunar far side, the side that always faces away from us. The analysis found water in the mantle basalt, water that came from deep inside the moon. And in December 2024, isotope analysis revealed something stranger still. The moon's water has two distinct origins. Part of it is isotopically identical to early Earth material, as if the moon and Earth shared the same water source billions of years ago. The other part came from comets. A body we called dry turns out to hold water from two different sources, in two different layers, across both hemispheres. The local story from the Lunar Maria, the dark flat plains visible from Earth, goes like this among the Aztec. The moon goddess Coyolxauhqui was shattered and placed in the sky as a warning. Her tears became the sea. Her sorrow became the tides. A shattered body, reassembled. Water as a remnant of something broken. Science says, comets and early Earth material. The Aztecs say, a shattered goddess, her tears preserved in the dark. In 2024, researchers published what might be the most precise statement in lunar science. Our understanding of the moon's water history has fundamentally changed. We now know it was never as dry as we thought. What they don't know is why the two isotope signatures, Earth and comet, are mixed in exactly the proportions they are. Water we didn't expect, and light we cannot explain. 4. The flashes that shouldn't happen. On April 6, 2026, astronauts Reid Wiseman and Jeremy Hansen aboard Artemis 2 were passing the moon during a total solar eclipse. Each of them, independently, reported seeing 3 bright flashes on the lunar surface. 3 flashes. Same location, same moment. This is not a new phenomenon. It has a name. Transient Lunar Phenomena, or TLP. The first recorded sighting? 557 AD. A Chinese astronomer recorded a sudden brightening on the dark side of the moon, lasting several minutes. Since then, more than 3,000 confirmed observations have been catalogued. Flashes, red glows. Mists, sections of the surface that briefly turn blue, then return to gray. Events lasting from seconds to hours. A project called Neliota, run by the European Space Agency, has confirmed nearly 200 lunar impact flashes in recent years. Meteoroids hitting the surface and creating brief explosions visible from Earth. That explains some of them. But not the longer events. Not the colored glows that last hours. Not the mists that appear over specific locations. Always the same locations, returning year after year. One hypothesis: radon gas, released by moonquakes, radioactively decaying near the surface and emitting a faint glow. But radon decays in minutes. Some of the documented glows lasted 12 hours. The crater Aristarchus is the most active location, responsible for nearly a third of all recorded TLPPs. It glows, repeatedly, without any confirmed mechanism. The Algonquin people of North America called the moon Grandmother Moon and believed she breathed, that her breath was visible on certain nights, rising from the surface in visible light. Astronomers have been watching Aristarchus for 400 years. The glow comes back. The cause remains unconfirmed. Science says, meteoroids, radon, electrostatic dust. The Algonquins say, she breathe. The Artemis 2 astronauts are the first humans to observe TLPs directly from space. Their report is under analysis. Light, from an unknown source, and an origin story with a missing chapter. 5. The moon is a chemical clone of the wrong body 4.5 billion years ago. According to the dominant scientific theory, a planet roughly the size of Mars crashed into the early Earth. The collision was catastrophic. Both bodies partially melted. Debris was thrown into orbit. Over millions of years, that debris coalesced into the moon. This is called the giant impact hypothesis. It explains the moon's size, its orbital mechanics, why it has a small iron core. It is the best theory we have. There is one problem. If the moon formed primarily from the impacting body, which simulations show should have contributed the majority of the debris, then the moon should be chemically different from Earth. Different isotope ratios, Different composition. It is not. The moon is isotopically almost identical to Earth. Not similar, identical. Oxygen isotopes, tungsten isotopes, silicon isotopes, all matching Earth's signatures to a precision that defies the standard model. The impactor should be the dominant material. The moon should look like the impactor. It looks like Earth. Scientists call this the isotope crisis. It is not a fringe concern. It has been published in Nature, Science, and presented at every major planetary science conference for the past decade. In 2025, a new paper proposed the multiple impact hypothesis, not one giant collision, but dozens of smaller ones over millions of years, gradually building the moon from Earth's own ejected material. It explains the isotope match, but it requires an entirely new reconstruction of the early solar system. The Dreamtime stories of Aboriginal Australians say the moon did not always exist. The sky was different before the moon arrived. Elders speak of a time when the night sky had no moon, only stars. And the tides were different. The animals behaved differently. The seasons were shorter. Geological evidence supports this. Early Earth had no large moon. The 24-hour day, the stabilized axial tilt, the moderate tides, all are consequences of the moon's arrival. The Aboriginal oral tradition describes the moon as something that came, not something that formed here. Science says, a giant impact. But the chemistry doesn't match. The Aboriginal tradition says, it came. Both acknowledge the same gap, an origin we cannot trace, and a surface we cannot fully map, because part of it is magnetic in ways that should be impossible. 6. The moon has a magnetic map, with no author. The moon has no global magnetic field. It lost it billions of years ago. The interior cooled, the dynamo stopped, the field collapsed. You can confirm this with any compass on the lunar surface. It points nowhere. And yet, NASA's Grail mission, 2 spacecraft that spent months mapping the moon's gravity field in unprecedented detail, revealed something unexpected. Scattered across the lunar surface, particularly on the far side, are dozens of localized magnetic anomalies. Regions where the rock is strongly magnetized. Regions where a compass would spin. Some of these anomalies are clustered directly opposite the moon's largest impact basins. The antipodal points, as if an impact on one side somehow magnetized the rock on the opposite side. The hypothesis: when a massive asteroid hits, it creates a shock wave that travels through the moon, focuses at the antipodal point, and the sudden pressure and heat briefly reactivates the magnetic field, just long enough to magnetize the surface rock before it cools. This is theoretically possible, but the math doesn't perfectly account for all the anomalies. Some are in locations with no corresponding antipodal basin. Some have magnetic signatures stronger than any impact model predicts. And then there is the far side itself, the hemisphere that always faces away from Earth, that no human has ever seen with naked eyes from the ground. The lunar far side is geologically different from the near side. Fewer maria, thicker crust, more ancient, more cratered, as if it is a different body, wearing a different skin. The Chang'e 4 mission landed on the far side in 2019. It found rocks 4 billion years old, from the early solar system, that have no counterpart on the near side. The Maori say the moon has 2 faces, the one it shows the world and the one it keeps for itself. The hidden face, they say, is where the old knowledge lives. Science says, antipodal magnetization, ancient impacts, crustal asymmetry. The Maori say, the hidden face holds the old knowledge. Neither explains why the far side is so fundamentally different that scientists have begun calling it, informally, a moon within a moon, a hidden face, and a connection to the body standing beneath it. A connection so precise that it may not be coincidence at all. 7. The moon and the human body. The lunar cycle is 29.53 days. The average human menstrual cycle, 29.5 days. This has been noted for 30,000 years. The oldest known lunar calendar was carved into bone around that time, tracking the cycles together. But the connection goes beyond the number. A 2021 study published in Science Advances analyzed 22 years of data from 1,500 participants. It found that human sleep patterns, specifically the timing of deep sleep, shift across the lunar cycle. In the days before a full moon, people fall asleep later and sleep less, regardless of whether they can see the moon. The effect was documented in urban populations with no view of the night sky, and in indigenous communities in the Toba-Com people of Argentina with no access to artificial light. The mechanism is unknown. There is no confirmed biological pathway by which the moon's light or gravity affects human sleep architecture at this level. A 2023 study from the University of Washington analyzed hospital birth records over 20 years. It found a statistically significant clustering of births in the days following the full moon, not dramatic but present, and consistent across multiple hospitals. The moon's gravitational pull is real. It moves billions of tons of ocean water twice a day. But the human body is small. The tidal force on a single human body from the moon is less than the gravitational force exerted by a nearby building. And yet, the data exists. The Inuit of the Arctic have a concept they call takik, the moon spirit, who they say is responsible for the rhythm of all living things, not as mythology, as observation. They say the moon does not control humans. It moves with them, like a tide that flows through the body, not through the sea. Science says no confirmed mechanism, but the correlation is real and reproducible. The Inuit say the moon moves with us. For 30,000 years, humans carved bones to track two rhythms together. We still don't know if it's coincidence. 7 mysteries. A moon that rings for 3 hours from a single impact. A coincidence of size and distance that exists only in this moment of cosmic time. Water that shouldn't be there, from 2 separate origins. Light that appears and disappears on a surface where nothing should burn. An origin story with a missing equation. A hidden face that is magnetically strange in ways we don't fully understand. And a connection to the human body that 30,000 years of observation cannot explain. And neither can we. Science has answers for each of these. Partial answers, probable answers, answers that account for most of the data and leave a remainder. What every culture on Earth noticed, independently, in their own language and their own framework, is that the moon is not passive, not a rock that happens to orbit, not a coincidence that happens to be beautiful. They all said, it watches. It moves with us. It arrived. Science doesn't say that, but science also doesn't fully say the opposite. Write in the comments, which of these 7 surprised you most? The ringing, the water, the size coincidence that will end in 600 million years? I want to know which one you're still thinking about. And subscribe, because on this planet and above it, there are still things we don't know how to name.